the thing that lets content creation be possible. Have you ever watched a live stream on Twitch? You ever checked out Reddit? You ever tweeted before? You ever watched anything on TikTok? Have you ever posted a video on YouTube? Well, if you like any of those things, if you like posting content on the internet and enjoying content on the internet, Section 230 is the one law that stands there to make all of that possible. And right now, the President of the United States, Democrats and Republicans all support either repealing Section 230 or changing Section 230, which could directly impact all of you guys, live streamers, YouTubers, social media influencers, directly. And the question I'd like to ask is, do you trust the folks that are in the United States Congress to be able to fully understand the internet and to be able to fully understand what you're doing as a content creator, to understand that you're trying to live stream video games on the internet, with the average age of Congress people being about 60 years old? They're about to potentially put into changes Section 230 that will directly impact your future. You need to understand what's going on. You need to understand the truth. We're going to literally read Section 230 to you. We're going to tell you how it impacts the internet, and most importantly, what you can do to protect your right to create content on the internet freely, so that doesn't just vaporize one day. This may be the most important episode of the Digital Drop podcast, depending on what happens to Section 230, so stick around to the end. Let's pay the bills. This podcast is sponsored by Restream. Why live stream to one platform when you can simultaneously live stream to every platform to discover new audiences faster using Restream.io?
Section 230 says that no provider or user of an interactive computer service shall be treated as the publisher or speaker of any information provided by an other information content provider. So in other words, online intermediaries that host or republish speech are protected against a range of laws that might otherwise be used to hold them legally responsible for what others say and do. The protected intermediaries include not only regular internet service providers, but also a range of interactive computer service providers, including basically any social media platform. So essentially what we're starting to learn here is that the people in DC who, as we've seen in the past, do not know the difference between Facebook and Google, now want to regulate what is going on the internet. This is a lot of information to take in.
Yeah, this is pretty big. Perrin, are you a little bit concerned that these folks that are potentially going to change Section 230 maybe don't understand the internet?
Well, I mean, it depends entirely on how it's changed. And I would imagine if they were going to make changes to it, they would at least understand the ramifications, but I don't necessarily trust that to be the case. So for anybody wondering in like layman's terms what this means, if someone goes on the Twitter, decides I want to defame Astral and say really, really bad things about Astral on Twitter, and they start posting this, and I decide, well, this is hurting my brand, I'm going to file a lawsuit versus them. And you know what? I'm going to sue Twitter for housing that information. I can't just sue Twitter because of Section 230, because Twitter is not legally liable for the speech that random other user on their platform has been saying. So if Section 230 did not exist, I could file a lawsuit versus this individual who's defaming me. Plus, I could file a lawsuit versus Twitter for hosting and publicizing that information. So it allows tech companies, it allows content platforms to exist and not be nullified out of existence based on lawsuits and legal ramifications of what their users might say on the platforms. So it kind of protects them, it protects the platform from the speech of its users. And this has a whole host of other different implications. But long story short, if they aren't liable for it, or if they do become liable for it, it would be much harder to exist because they'd be dealing with lawsuits and legal ramifications for some of these platforms have millions and millions of users. That's a lot of potential lawsuits, right? It would also make it so that no new big tech company or content platform could enter the market out of fear of having to deal with lawsuits. You wouldn't make enough money right away to deal with all the lawsuits. So this would actually, not having 230 would make Facebook stronger. It would make Twitter stronger because they have the money. Well, maybe Twitter doesn't, but Facebook would have the money to be able to counter hundreds, if not thousands of lawsuits, whereas a brand new platform would not be able to do so. So there's a lot to unpack here, but yeah, to answer your actual question, do I trust lawmakers? Right now, I would say no. I wouldn't trust them. I would trust some of our newer, more internet savvy lawmakers on this one. We have a couple more younger Congress men and women who would have a better understanding of this. But I think we need a lot more time to discuss this as a country, as an internet world. I mean, I know if you guys aren't in the US, you're like, why is Digital Drop Podcast talking about US law right now? This will affect people outside of US because it governs the social media and content platforms that exist as companies in the US, right? So you should be caring about this even if you're not an American.
Yeah, I have a few things I want to say about it really quick. So first of all, President Trump sent out a tweet saying that we should repeal Section 230. And I want to put that up on the screen right now so you guys can see that. The President of the United States, it wasn't just that tweet, actually. He sent a separate tweet where it said, like, literally repeal it. And he is doing that in retaliation to him being banned from all the social media platforms. And so without Section 230, you could make an argument that no social media platform right now could exist at all. So the Section 230 makes it so that these social media platforms are, there it is, repeal Section 230. There it is. Donald Trump says repeal Section 230. Section 230 makes it so that social media platforms can moderate content on these platforms without being legally liable for moderating that content. And so if every single piece of content on these social platforms, on YouTube, on Facebook, on Twitter, on Reddit, was the personal responsibility or the company responsibility of those social platforms, then unfortunately, they probably all have to completely shut down. And I know that Ashel just said a moment ago that they have the resources, the legal resources to defend themselves. I don't think they do. There are billions of pieces of content posted on social media every single day. These companies don't have the resources to moderate all of it, clearly, as you guys know, and they don't have the resources to defend themselves legally from every crazy thing that every single human on the internet says. And so most of these companies will probably have to shut down. So that means that a lot of you guys out there that are posting content on the internet, you guys would cease to have YouTube. You would cease to be able to be a YouTuber, potentially, if this completely went away. You guys would cease to be able to be a live streamer, potentially, if this went away. So the implications are massive here. And so now that the president wants to repeal this, and now that Democrats and Republicans got reelected and elected to regulate social media platforms, there's a couple different scenarios that could play out here that are either favorable for creators or not favorable at all for creators that you guys should know about. And if they go the really hard-nosed route in terms of regulation, that could be really bad for all of you guys that just want to freely post content on the internet and do whatever you want. Ross, why don't you kind of outline maybe the more curated scenario in the future here of what could happen on social media platforms? Let's say legislation comes in, they decide to reform Section 230 and say, social media platforms will let you continue to exist, but you have to moderate super heavily. What could that look like for content creators and for the internet at large?
I mean, it's censorship, essentially, is what it is. I think that's kind of the only way to press it. I think another important issue is that this is not necessarily just a right versus left issue. I'm going to read you a statement from what President-elect Biden said less than a year ago. The idea that it's a tech company that Section 230 should be revoked immediately should be revoked, number one. For Zuckerberg and other platforms, it should be revoked because it's merely not an internet company. It's propagating falsehoods that they know to be false. So this is going to be coming from both sides of the aisle. And that on its own, it's being attacked from two different sides for two different reasons, which means at some point there probably actually is going to be some changes made to Section 230. Obviously, Section 230 was established, it was actually established back in the 1930s, but in 1996, it was reestablished. And there was no even hint that social media was going to be a thing. There was no hint that YouTube was even going to be a thing. So they're approaching this from everything has changed. Now we need to rewrite the laws. That's scary, essentially. 230 was changed was not only would content creators be out of a voice, be out of potentially be out of platforms to not only share their opinions, but share their work, that share their career. But the amount of businesses that will go under, the amount of businesses that rely on Facebook and Twitter advertising and Instagram advertising, the amount of people that make their living off of these platforms, that would essentially all go away. What would also likely happen under this case is kind of referring back to what Perrin said is, or Perrin and AWOL, what you both said is, if something happened and then these platforms then had to fight their own battles, essentially what you would see then is they'd have to start making money, and Facebook would probably become a pay-to-use platform, and so would Twitter, because they're going to have, and because that also allows them to kind of extend their terms and services and include more things in there, but also earn the money that they're going to have to defend themselves with. So in the long run, changing Section 230, it's not even a political battle. It's literally going to be detrimental to the economy itself.
It's the future of the internet. I mean, one thing I'd like to add to that, if they decide to heavily regulate these social media companies, which they may, everybody talks about Facebook like they're villains and Twitter like they're villains, and I get it. I get the criticisms of them. But if we go to the heavy regulation side of things, the analogy that NBC used is that YouTube and Twitter and Reddit and all these platforms will become more like a magazine, where like an editor will edit the content that you see on Facebook, and an editor will edit the content you see on YouTube, and an editor will edit the content you see on Reddit, etc. And it needs to be approved by their editorial board before anyone else can see it. Whereas right now, you guys can post content freely on your channels, and anyone in the whole world can see it, and no editor has to be there to double check your content to make sure it's okay to be seen by the internet. Do you guys want Facebook's editorial board, Reddit's editorial board, Twitch's editorial board, Twitter's editorial board to double check your live streams and your videos before they can be posted on those websites? Do you think they have the resources to approve that content in time? Do you think that they have do you think that they're going to be interested in supporting small creators or low quality creators or people that are just getting started whose content quality isn't up to their standards? Do you want to have to appeal to some group of people and just hope that your content can get out there? I mean, to me, it's a dystopian nightmare to think about that scenario, where there's this council, if you will, or this editorial board on all these social platforms that has to approve content before it gets posted on the internet. That takes away the beauty of the internet that we're all participating in right now. The beauty is we can do this podcast and we can say whatever the fuck we want. Twitter has no say in that. Facebook has no say in that. Twitch has no say in that. YouTube has no say in that. We can say whatever we want right now, and nobody has to approve what we say, because those platforms are not liable for what we say on the podcast. I could say the craziest shit in the entire world right now into the camera, and YouTube has no legal liability. And that makes the Digital Drop podcast beautiful, and every piece of content that's on the internet beautiful and possible. Once they become liable for that, if lawmakers put that into place, then this whole beautiful internet, this free internet where small businesses can thrive, creators can thrive, everybody can get the attention they want on the internet, get their idea off of the ground, it just then gets crushed. And we go back to the way things were in old media, where if you wanted to get attention, you had to be in with the radio stations. You had to be in with the TV industry. You had to buy an ad in the newspaper, and you could only get your content in places that are curated by businesses with editorial teams. I don't want to go back to the 1950s. I don't want to go back to the 1960s, the 1970s. I want to move forward with a freer internet where everybody can post content and everybody has their own voice and their own distribution that they control. And putting regulation on Section 230 and regulation on these social media companies will take your voice away, audience. Just get ready for that. So everybody out there who says Zuckerberg's evil and we need to regulate Facebook, when you say we need to regulate Facebook, you're saying I want to regulate myself. So keep in mind, you're saying you want to regulate yourself when you want to regulate these platforms, because all of the content on those platforms is you. All right, keep that in mind. We all look at them as like these external entities that have like their own content, and they're like, somehow Facebook is directly responsible for all the crazy stuff that happens on their platform. The individuals are the ones posting all the content there. You guys are responsible for the content on Facebook, so keep that in mind. When you talk about regulation, you're regulating your own voice, so it is a double-edged sword. And I wanted to highlight that because that's the stakes here, is if you decide to dull that sword or you decide to control that content, you're deciding to control yourself and your own ability to have a free voice on the internet. And to me, that's very worrisome. Perrin, what are you thinking right now?
First, I want to address a question. Chat Gavin Cleary's asking, can I explain what I meant by how it will affect outside the US? So imagine Twitter for a second, and suddenly Section 230 doesn't exist. Twitter does not make a lot of money. Twitter would cave and be completely destroyed as a platform. They would not be able to exist because they don't have the legal resources to fight lawsuits for every obnoxious thing that everyone says on the internet, on Twitter, every single day. So they would actually just cease to exist as a platform. Why does this affect you? Because it affects the legitimacy of the platforms themselves that exist as business entities within the United States. So platforms that aren't in the United States, they wouldn't be encompassed by this law. But any of the major content platforms that are in the United States, this would affect those platforms. Therefore, they would affect you in that way. So YouTube, Facebook, Twitch, Twitter, etc.
Even Twitch TikTok with the acquisition, like Instagram, all of them, WhatsApp, now that it's been acquired by Facebook, all of those are governed by U.S. entities and U.S. law because they're based here in the United States from a legal standpoint. So and let's be honest, most of the internet is based here in the United States. And so when lawmakers make laws about the internet, it controls basically the entire world's internet with the exception of China, because China has created their own separate internet that their government controls. So that's the stakes here. When we're talking about US law, it's actually going to impact the same Facebook that's in Australia, the same YouTube that's in Europe, the same TikTok that's in Africa. It's going to control everything. And if these companies can't effectively operate in the United States, then they won't be able to operate in these other countries as well because they're a legal entity here. That's why this impacts the entire world. So Perrin, what do you think is a good scenario? I know that we're all upset about social platforms maybe not cracking down on hate speech or different negative elements on socials that's been driving this conversation. So what's a good scenario here that actually maybe cleans things up a little bit without crushing our free internet that we have right now?
I think there are some people who think they look at regulation is bad. If we have to assume that regulation is going to happen, and it's because it sounds like both parties actually want some sort of regulation here. They want to do something to rein in big tech. So what can be done here that would work? Right now we clearly have a hate speech problem, at least in the United States. And this could be a problem throughout the rest of the world too. It could propagate. It's one of the growing pains of the internet, of having this platform that literally has infinite amounts of information at any sort of time. And it can be good information, it can be bad, it can be whatever. You could actually have good regulation if you set up Section 230 to allow for everything except for hate speech. So that if there is hate speech on a platform, that company could be legally liable for that hate speech. This would force them to have some sort of system to moderate and clean it up. So at least if they were to have a system when legal, claims come in, when lawsuits come in versus it, they could say, hey, we've got a system, that appeared on our platform for X number of minutes before it was removed by our system. They would have some checks and balances, and they would be forced, in order to exist as a company, they would be forced to address that issue. And without forcing companies to address that issue, we've seen what's happened. We've been having to live through it for the past 4 to 5 to 7 years of just massive amounts of fake stuff on the internet, lots of hateful stuff, unregulated. No one's doing anything about it. They're just now starting to do stuff about it, but nothing was forcing them to do so, other than it started to become bad for their brands. So that could be a way to do it. I don't know if that necessarily work out 100%, but that's one way in which you could look at maybe changing the legislation to kind of put some more pressure on these content platforms to clean up their act and to help police it a little more. And that way it's not censoring free speech necessarily. It's removing hateful speech, which should not be there to begin with realistically, and we really don't need it. So that's one way I could see it happening. That's one way. I think that at least on the Democrat side, and the progressives and the US have said that they could change the law. That's one idea that's been thrown out there. But I think a lot more needs to be discussed. It's something that, you really have to think it through and what the ramifications would be. And do we even really need that now? With some of the way we're seeing some things now, if you look and see if a brand realizes that hate speech and violent speech. And there are systems already on every platform to address that. They're just not rigorous enough. But now they're becoming more and more rigorous because it's becoming bad for their brand. So in a capitalistic society, is it almost self-regulating itself after a while, after all is said and done? I don't really know. I mean, that's one way I could see it working out. I mean, if you certainly can't completely remove it. That would actually destroy everything.
If the internet would be gonzo if you completely removed it. So Trump's assertion that we should completely repeal Section 230, if that becomes something that you guys see in is a prevailing opinion amongst politicians, I encourage you to contact all the congressmen and all the representatives on Twitter, call them, mail them, social media, tag them, and let them know, do not repeal Section 230, because if they did, your YouTube channel's over, bro. Your live stream is over. Reddit is over. Without that law, these companies are donezo. So we can't get rid of it entirely. That's the only thing keeping them alive. So reforming it is the path here. So anything about like completely eliminating it is super scary. I lose my job. Perrin loses his job. Ross loses his job. All of y'all potentially lose all your channels and everything, and the internet completely implodes and becomes something tiny in comparison to what it is today. That is the nightmare scenario. So what Trump is suggesting, that's crazy, bro. I'm not going for that. But reforming it, perhaps. Ross, you have something that you want to say about this?
I do. First of all, I do want to say I think Perrin actually absolutely hit this on the head, is that the discussion needs to be had, but this cannot be rushed. This cannot be something that lawmakers just jump in one day and just start throwing regulations around. That cannot happen. This needs to be a long, ongoing conversation with not only the politicians, but with Silicon Valley, the people behind these tech industries and platforms as well. They absolutely need to be part of the conversation. The scary thought for me is that it was Senator Hawley from Missouri, I believe. He actually wants the FTC to take over Section 230.
No.
Hell no. Listen, and the FTC's already fired back and say, we don't have the manpower. The platforms themselves don't have the manpower right now to monitor their own platforms. How is the FTC going to do this to the internet? That's a stupid, stupid idea.
Well, let's ask the audience. Does the audience, let's do a quick audience poll here. Do you guys want the FTC to moderate and regulate your content on YouTube, Twitch, Twitter, TikTok, and Instagram? Put a yes in chat if you want them to moderate it. Let us know live. Go back to you, Ross.
Yeah, chat's going to be empty. We've seen what happens when the government takes over things like this. Let's just go back to 1979 when they took over education, and our education system's been on a complete downfall. But going back to something else that Perrin said, talking about free speech, I've actually got an article from The Verge here, and I'm going to copy this link and post it in the live chat because it's a really good article that people should check out. It really breaks it down and puts it in simple terms for people like idiots like me to understand. Let's talk about the relationship between the actual First Amendment, free speech, and what's going on here. Because if you go onto any comment sections, everyone's like, well, there goes free speech. No, shut up. That's not what's happening here. The First Amendment prohibits the government from restricting most forms of speech, but it includes many proposals to force tech companies to moderate content. A law that required companies to moderate content based on the political viewpoint it expresses, for example, would be struck down as unconstitutional. Private companies can also create rules that restrict speech if they so choose. This is why Facebook and Twitter ban hate speech, for example, even though it's legally permitted in the United States. These moderation rules are protected by the First Amendment as well. So being able to do this is actually protected by the First Amendment. And when people say your free speech is taken away because of this, that just shows that you actually don't even know what the First Amendment is. I'm going to post that link.
Can you break that down in even more simple terms? Because that was a lot of jibba jabba. Can you make that even more simple, please?
Yeah, essentially, private companies can ban hate speech. Their ability to ban hate speech on their private platforms is protected by the First Amendment. That's essentially all that's saying.
So they're not violating the First Amendment. They're actually protected by the First Amendment to ban whoever they want because they're a private company. They are not the government.
Yes, and by the way, you agree to this. When you sign up on these platforms and you read the terms and services, this is all in the terms and services. By the way, they can remove you anytime. Yeah, anytime you want, they can remove it. So by signing up, by creating that username, creating your password, and hit submit and creating that account, you've agreed that they can do this. So you really don't have much of a base of an argument if you do get removed for whatever reason it is. They have the ability to do this being a private company, and it's actually protected by the First Amendment.
That makes sense. Question here in chat from the Chatty Pug. I want to address this. Do you think tech companies would make creators liable for hate speech from live stream comments? So in this case, if Section 230 were to be repealed, the tech company themselves would actually be liable, and they wouldn't necessarily be able to pass on that liability to you. And so if anyone were to, let's say somebody in chat right now were to say something about Nazis, please don't do this. But let's say somebody in chat were to be able to say something about Nazis. If we repealed Section 230, then all the platforms that we're live streaming on right now, Twitter and YouTube and Twitch and what have you, they would be the liable ones for that hate speech. And anyone that were to come in and sue would sue that particular platform because they have the money and they have the liability in that scenario because they're the ones that are allowing that content and that hate speech to propagate. Us as individuals with our own moderation tools, we're signing a terms of service and an agreement with those platforms that we can follow their rules that they set because they're the ones that are liable, okay? But we wouldn't be liable in that scenario. So is there a scenario where us as individuals would be liable for hate speech? I mean, that's a scenario that would also, I think, implode the internet as we know it. If we were to stream right now and we were personally liable or our personal LLCs were liable, if y'all said anything crazy in chat, we'd be in a position where we couldn't do this show because some crazy jackwad could come in here and just say, you know, the N-word a million times and then the NAACP could sue us for a couple $1,000,000 and then we'd be out of a house and we'd be homeless. Like that would make it so that we couldn't even broadcast the show. So in either scenario, having an individual creator or having the tech company directly liable for hate speech makes it nearly impossible for us to actually be able to broadcast on the internet freely. So I don't think either scenario makes sense at all. You know what I'm saying? And I'm not a lawyer, but I don't think that there's a way for the tech companies to pass on liability to individuals rather than holding that liability themselves. Because you know lawyers are going to go wherever the money is. And a lawyer is going to be thinking, when I'm suing somebody, am I going to sue Ross Dillon? Regular everyday guy who's got, you know, thousands of dollars? Or am I going to go after YouTube and Google who's got billions of dollars? Obviously, they're going to go where the money is. And so I don't think that that's the passing of liability is possible. Would you guys agree with that? And do you think creators would stand for such a scenario where they are personally liable for hate speech? I think that would also make free broadcast on the internet impossible. What do you think, Parent?
I mean, it's kind of going that direction, but I don't think creators could handle it. I mean, so you're seeing copyright go that way, right? So the DMCA claims the creators will be they're liable for what they're choosing to show in their video content and what they're using for their audio visual content. So if they copy someone else's stuff, they'll be liable for that. Will they be liable for the things that they say? Yes, that's the way it is now. But being liable for the things that other people say, like your chat, like the question the Chatty Pug is answering, that would destroy creators, period. So if we take it back to look at Section 230, if any changes are made to it, it kind of seems to me like it's kind of good as is. And if you change something that's like it's actually kind of working and allowing this environment right now, you could maybe improve it, but you definitely can't remove it. I do want to go back to someone made a point. They're talking about would it kill free speech if you were to add that clause to it that said the platforms are liable for hate speech. Technically, that would be a law governing content creator platforms to have to address speech in a specific way. So I think technically that would be censoring free speech from a government entity. It's just a government entity asking other content and companies to do so, which that starts to get into gray territory. So I'm not so sure that would work too well. But do we even need something like that if it's currently working? I'm not, I think that's the question is we want clearly, and at least in the US government, they want regulation for big tech, which means regulation for content producing platforms, Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, Twitch, etc. Does it come in the form of Section 230? Does it really, is that really the area we want to do it on? Or is there some other place we can begin to look at? Because for me, it seems like things are working here pretty well. And I don't see why we need to broke this wheel when this isn't the part that's broken.
I agree. I don't think that Section 230 is broken. I think it's working great. It's amazing. The growth we're seeing on the internet, the growth of Facebook and YouTube and live streaming and all of these economies that are popping up where people can make a living broadcasting on the internet. It's phenomenal. It's a dream come true. Anybody can work from their bedroom in their home and make a living through affiliate marketing, through donations, through creating content around your interest. You can build a small business. You could be a real estate agent who can get deals through the internet. Like, it's freaking incredible. Like, why would we destroy that? Let's talk about the other scenario. So NBC did a good job laying out the three kind of ranges of what could happen here, guys. So we talked about where we're currently at today, which is kind of the middle of the road, where the internet is somewhat regulated by these social media platforms. There is some moderation. Then we talked about the extreme scenario where it is highly regulated and there's editorial boards that approve everything because these companies are legally liable. Let's talk about the other scenario on the far end of a completely unregulated internet, where social media companies are not able to moderate any content at all. I mean, what do you think that scenario looks like in terms of how the internet looks in that scenario, where social media companies are literally not allowed to moderate content, and we let quote unquote free speech roll, and we go with those kinds of theories that you hear and the kind of talk that we hear of like, stop violating my First Amendment rights and just let me post whatever on the internet. What happens in that scenario where these platforms just have to let all the content flow out that anybody wants to post ever? How does the internet look in that scenario? Because I think it's very different than today. Ross, can you paint a picture for us of what the internet looks like there?
Oh yeah, I'm about to go all Van Gogh on you right now. What happens here is a lot of these companies are going to completely fall under, because all advertisers are going to pull out their advertising dollars because they don't want to be associated with this hate speech. That's probably going to be the most likely scenario. Obviously, platforms like Facebook and things like that would survive because there's just too many people on the platforms that are spending too much money. An interesting thing is about a year ago, Jack Dorsey of Twitter actually talked about how one of the things he would be interested in trying is a kind of a regulated version of Twitter, but also a wild, wild west version of Twitter where anything goes. So that option, it's being discussed by Jack Dorsey. It's obviously, if he's thinking about it, it's in the heads of other platform CEOs and stuff like that. Well, I don't think it'll come to fruition, but the idea is out there, and that is a possible path we could see in the future, is having two different versions of these social media platforms.
That makes sense. Perrin, do you think the internet would be this lawless land full of N-words, not like swastikas and crazy stuff, if it was a completely free internet with no moderation? Or is that blown out of proportion there?
All right, so we have these wonderful devices, our phones. If you think about these, we have the internet on these. Because we have the internet on these, it's literally something in our pocket that has infinite knowledge and wisdom in it, right? If you have a completely unregulated content platforms and the internet's completely unregulated, then you have also the infinite possibility of every single dark, evil, whatever, and thing. And you also have the infinite for complete, utter fake information. So you suddenly are drowning out this possibility where it's endless wisdom and like knowledge with endless anything, right? So that makes it a lot different of a value at that point, because it becomes very challenging to use the internet as a tool to find good information, because it's also filled with lots of other information that is also not good or not correct or not true. Now we've got a whole different problem, and that's going to have to be solved in some other different way. So if you can go completely unregulated, you create other challenges that will have to be addressed in some other way if you actually even want to use platform properly. Because then you're talking about having to develop skill sets of like, how do you, which you already kind of have to do this, how do you search the internet to find what you're looking for and verify that it's actually good information that you can rely on? And if you have a completely unregulated internet, that challenge becomes more and more and more difficult. So I think going completely unregulated, going complete wild, wild west, is it like super, super bad? I don't know, but it just becomes more challenging for sure to be able to use it in a way that's actually beneficial to you. It's actually helpful to you in a genuinely good way. If you want to use it that's helpful to you in like a genuinely evil way, then yeah, there's that possibility too. Technically, it opens up more possibilities but I don't think that they're good possibilities. I think they're dangerous possibilities. And we have to be careful of that. As a society, we have to be careful about, I don't know if us as human beings, if we're ready for that type of thing yet. If we're going to go down that route, I think we really need to be able to understand how this technology affects us, and it is affecting us. And we have to be able to understand that psychologically before we make a decision like that, because we're already struggling with how it's affecting us. And if we're going to do more damage in that regard by going down to this wild, wild west route, then I don't think there would be good ramifications coming from it. I just have a feeling it would not be great. So for now, I would say we should not go that route until we understand this impact on us a little bit better. And then once we get there, I think we could begin to look at like, okay, what's it look like if we just open up the information exchange completely? Is that a possibility? Can we explore it? We need to have those discussions before anything like that happens.
That makes sense. And so it's clear that we like the internet in its current state, whatever that looks like, where you have a relatively free internet where you can distribute content as you see fit as a content creator, but there are some referees and there's some moderation in place so that we can keep the darkest elements of humanity off the internet while still keeping a relatively free flow. And that also includes why we have signed yet again with our #1 sponsor on the show, Restream, because we believe that you guys should be able to distribute your content on every single platform. Ross is going to post our link in chat right now. We do believe that you should be able to distribute your content freely on the internet on every platform simultaneously. That is the most beautiful thing about the internet, is you can say whatever you want, you can share whatever you want within certain guardrails, very basic ones. And that allows you to express yourself. So we stream on DLive, on Trovo, on Periscope, on YouTube, on Twitch, and on Facebook every single day. I do it twice a day. Karen also does it using Restream. And we recommend that you guys Restream to get your content out there and to grow faster. And thank you to Restream for signing with us once again. We believe that your content should be everywhere on the internet and that the government should not be editorially censoring that super, super hard moving forward. And so we're very proud to have them as our sponsor, because I think that the values of distribution everywhere really falls in line with where we're at when it comes to things like Section 230. And as always, I'm going to kick it over to our wise master, Ross Dillon, to sum things up and to give us that last nugget of information we need to know to end the episode. Ross, you better deliver.
Okay, I'll deliver. It's okay to have opinions on things like these, but this is a massive, massive issue. And I want to go back to kind of what Perrin referred to earlier, and that's kind of the thing that stuck with me this entire episode, is it's okay to have your opinions on this, but because of the size of this issue and because of the impact regulating or dismantling Section 230 will have, probably the best option is not to come to a decisive opinion. This is something that we all need to work together on. This is something that lawmakers need to work together on. This is something that the tech giants need to work on. Corporate America has to work on. We all deserve to have a voice in this opinion, and we need to have a civil conversation about it. We need to have the civil conversation before any decisions are made, and that doesn't mean, oh, well, let's talk about it for a couple hours in court this week, and then next week we'll vote on it. No, this needs to be an ongoing study. We need to get the biggest and brightest minds to come together to help form their opinions rather on this, and make the best decision moving forward, whatever that is. My final piece of advice would be just be open. Be open to having the conversation. Be open to hearing other people's opinions. Be open to changing your mind if you hear something new, if you get new information. That's the best path moving forward. The last thing we need to be doing is pushing for immediate action on Section 230. We'll see you tomorrow.